So thank you for joining us for Blessed Are the Peacemakers, New Wine, New Wineskins conference. And thank you to Multnomah University and Seminary and Graduate School for this opportunity to host this event. And this morning, we are going to have a panel in a little bit. Before that, I just want to emphasize a few things related to the conference as a whole. Blessed Are the Peacemakers, as we said last night in a conference preview that you'll have opportunity to watch if you weren't there. It is recorded and made available to all conference attendees. We talked about the Beatitudes are not platitudes. Blessed are the peacemakers, not cheesemakers. This famous line from Monty Python's The Life of Brian. Many of you may be familiar with it. Many of you may not be familiar with it. But I just am so struck by that scene in The Life of Brian. And Brian was Jesus's next door neighbor. And people misunderstood that they thought he was the Messiah. And he said, no, the Messiah lives next door. But Brian and others are listening to Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount. They're off at a distance and they can't really hear what he is saying. And they think he's saying, blessed are the cheesemakers. Blessed are the cheesemakers. What does that mean? And I think a lot of times, whether we hear Jesus or not, audibly, we might not really understand or comprehend what he's getting at with such beatitudes. Like, what is a beatitude? Beatitude like, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. What is a beatitude? Well, it's about the blessed life. What's the blessed life? The enjoyable life, the honorable life, not a shameful life. Jesus in Matthew chapter 5, and also an equivalent passage in Luke 6, Sermon on the Plain, Luke 6, Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5 through 7. Jesus starts out talking about what his kingdom or God's kingdom, heaven's kingdom is all about. People are following him. They're flocking to him because of all that he says and all that he does. Matthew 4, he says, repent for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And then he goes about healing and casting out demons and caring for people. And they're thinking, who is this? Who is this? Could this be the anointed one, the Messiah? And then to make clear what he's really about and what his mission is all about, he goes up on a mount. His disciples come to him. The crowds are surrounding him. And he sits down and he teaches them about what it means to be a citizen of his kingdom. This is really Jesus' State of the Union address, not as president. He's not elected. He calls us. But blessed are the peacemakers. But he's telling us what it is like to be a citizen of his kingdom. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God. And blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. These are beatitudes. They're describing what it means to be a citizen of Jesus' kingdom community, and they are about the honorable life. As Jesus leads us into the promised land, Moses went up on the mount to get the law. Jesus goes up on the mount to give the law. And this is what it means to be a part of his people, his shalom, peaceable kingdom community as we enter into the promised land. Matthew 5. So the conference is really dealing with one of these beatitudes, not a platitude. A platitude is like a statement that's been said so often, it's lost all meaning. And we might treat the beatitudes that way, but really it's as I said last night, G.K. Chesterton, he said, it's not that the Christian life has been tried and been found wanting. Rather, it has been found difficult and left untried. And I have been reflecting on the Beatitudes for many, many years. At New Wine, New Wineskins, we're seeking to grow into understanding and living into the Beatitudes, these characteristic traits of Jesus's kingdom community. And it's a long process. It's a long journey in terms of living into these characteristic traits of what Jesus invites us into, and which reflects God's heart, the heart of the triune God, Father, Son, and Spirit, and that Jesus models in his life. So this is what we're going to be dealing with throughout this conference. We'll have 3 plenary panels today. One that'll be just in a few minutes. We'll really be dealing with different aspects of how we engage in conflict, in pursuit of conflict resolution or transformation. It's something that we at New Wine, New Wineskins are really wanting to grow into and serve the church and the community at large as we grow into this ourselves. We're going to have other panels, and you can see all of those listed throughout the materials that you have that are on Eventbrite and elsewhere. We're also going to have workshops today from different leaders, thought leaders from different vantage points. And again, you have all that available to you. So you'll have opportunity to watch everything later. So those that you can't attend, those particular workshops you can't attend, you can watch them later. So you'll be able to see 2 and engage in conversation in 2 of those particular workshops. But then we'll all be together in here for these panel discussions. So without further ado, I'm going to open in prayer, and then we're going to enter into the first workshop. I don't think there's anything I missed in terms of logistics, and so I feel like we're ready to go. Okay? God, I want to thank you for this time today. I thank you for those who have come together, both online, those who will watch the recordings, those here present. And I think back, not to the life of Brian in that episode where blessed are the cheesemakers. What's he talking about? But blessed are the peacemakers, as people heard that for the first time, wondering, who is this? Could this be the anointed one, the Messiah? Who is this rabbi? What strange teaching? But it was a word of hope. It was a word of challenge. It was a word of invitation, not to live a shameful life, but an honorable life, the Beatitudes. Lord, guide us, direct us by your Spirit, shape my heart, shape my life, shape our hearts, shape our lives, our actions, as we sharpen one another today, as we encourage and exhort one another. Lord, take us out of here more equipped to be about your peaceable kingdom, your kingdom of shalom. Bless each person here today. And Lord, raise up your church, raise up the community at large. May your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. We think of the situation in Ukraine today. We think of the situation between Ukraine and Russia. Talk about the United Nations and the world at large, the community of nations, different trouble spots around the world, whether it's in Ukraine, whether it's Syria, Somalia, Yemen, Sudan, Myanmar, close to home, with all the shootings in our land, with the hatred and animosity and indifference that so often shapes and controls our hearts. Lord, make us peaceable kingdom. May your peace come, the peace that transcends and surpasses all understanding. May it shape our hearts and lives, and may we be agents of your peace. Lord, in your mercy, hear this prayer. It's in Christ's name we pray. Amen. Okay, so if the first panelists, first group of panelists would please come up and join me here. We'll begin, and don't seem so excited to join me. You can see how slowly they're walking up here. I guess they didn't know that I would be up here too. But Trudi sang. Bob Wall is up there somewhere. I don't know where he went to, but is he going to join us here shortly, Elizabeth? And you have their bios in your information packets. Do they have those available, or is it just online for them? It's just online. Okay. So I will share a little bit about each one of our panelists so you know who they are. And what I'm going to do, if they are listening, already we have animosity and hostility brewing. This is not looking good. These are my dear colleagues and friends, at least I think they are. They serve on New Wine's advisory council, or in Mr. Bob Wall's case, he's a former advisory council member for New Wine, New Wineskins. And we're going to introduce each one before you share, okay? So we're gonna start out with Pastor Schiave. I'll introduce a little bit about you, and then if you could share so that people remember the bio as you're sharing, because it'll connect. Does that make sense? And then sure, we'll go on to the next person on the panel, because they have the information online, but not to hand, so I'm going to read it. But again, this particular forum is titled Peacemaking, a Core Competency of God's Kingdom. Peacemaking is in short supply today, is the focus of this particular panel. It's like an endangered species or a lost art form. We will be gleaning wisdom from these Christian leaders, 5 Christian leaders, and New Wine, New Wineskins advisors who invest a great deal of time and energy in peacemaking. The aim of the panel is to provide insights and practical tools for how we can foster peacemaking as a core competency, and that's your particular role. So you got to bring it home in our lives. The panelists will engage such subjects as emotional intelligence, indigenous cultural contributions in peacemaking, the cultivation of a quiet spirit, that's one I really need, for contending against over-stimulation, and an awareness and expansion of our set of tools for addressing conflict. So our panelists are Professor Ruben Alvarado, Pastor Trudi Sang, Pastor Tom Schiave, Pastor Jim Sequeira, and Mr. Bob Wall. So I'm going to start out in the order of how they'll be sharing, introducing each one, and then they'll share for about 5 minutes or so, and then we'll go on to the next. And then we're going to have opportunity to interact, that you can ask questions of our panelists, depending on how much time is left to us. We have about an hour for this. So Pastor Tom Schiave is pastor, senior pastor at Gateway Church in Portland, Oregon. And let me just make sure I use the right bio to describe him and not what I would come up with for him. He is motivating and motivated by encouraging followers of Jesus to enjoy the Father, build others in their faith, and engage in creative culture-making ministries. For 44 years, he has been immersed in church ministry as a youth pastor, college pastor, associate pastor, and lead pastor in 7 churches. He has also served as a president of a regional association of churches. He teaches at retreats, conferences, and churches throughout the West, and has coached varsity football and lacrosse. Tom has been an instructor in pastoral ministries and spiritual formation at Multnomah Biblical Seminary for 24 years. You've been here longer than I've been here. He's been here longer than you've been here, Brad. When not shepherding at Gateway Church or teaching at Multnomah Biblical Seminary, Tom can be found with his wife, Kathy, hiking in the gorge, watching the waves at the Oregon coast, or taking a movie in at one of the area theaters. He actually took me to see The Doors live in concert, 1967 at Camas Theater. I'll never forget. He also enjoys a good plate of pasta, a round of golf, and taking his granddaughter, Aubrey Dawn, to the mailbox. I just wanted to say too, Pastor Schiave has been a godsend to my family and me, and to me personally in this last year plus, in addition to Dr. Robert Potter, just in terms of Pastor Schiave helping me on emotional intelligence, self-management issues in light of my son's traumatic brain injury. So I really wanted him to share about emotional intelligence, self-management as it relates to conflict resolution. Pastor Schiave.
Yeah, thanks. It's great to be a part of this panel. I guess I could begin, and I want to be careful because I know that this subject has been taken to the extreme recently in the press. But I think when you consider emotional intelligence, think about the slap that was heard around the world. Okay, the recent situation at the Oscars, it gives you a kind of an illustration of why emotional intelligence is so very, very important. Think about the reactions that Will Smith could have done and the things he could have had happen, and the difference those would have made. And that is part of what emotional intelligence is. It's our ability kind of to recognize and understand our own emotions in us, and then to use that awareness to manage our behavior and relationships. So that's really what it is. It's kind of in the middle of a conflict or a discussion where the parties may, not necessarily be agreeable. It's saying, okay, what emotion am I feeling at this particular time inside of me? How will I manage that emotion? And then how will I use that emotion to manage this situation in a positive way? And I think that's why emotional intelligence is so important in biblical peacemaking, because it's really seeking to understand before being understood, as Stephen Covey said, and it's helping to kind of regulate how you're feeling for the benefit of other people. Viktor Frankl, who was in a number of prisoner war camps, actually, who was a professor of neurology and psychiatry and wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning. Some of you probably have read that book. Talked about the fact that the one thing he could do in those 3 camps that he was a prisoner in during World War II was the only thing he had was his attitude. And the only thing he had was his ability to react to whatever happened to him. And he came out with such easy phrases like, it's more important to be interested than interesting. And I think a lot of us often want to be interesting, but Frankl said, very important to be interested in other people. That's even a stronger emotion there. It kind of goes along with James 1:9, seek to understand before being understood. And James says there, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Now let's go back really quick. Let me know when I'm over my 5 minutes here, Paul.
Okay, we'll go on to the next person now.
Okay.
No, you have a few more minutes.
Yeah, okay. Think of, for example, the situation, and I really like the panelists, so if you want to move on, that's great. I've got a lot to learn from them.
You're interesting.
So when you think of the situation with Will Smith and what happened there, he's now banned from attending any Oscar events for 10 years. His reputation is a bit tarnished now, although I really appreciated him. And just imagine he had to go up after that incident and accept an Academy Award for Best Actor, which he certainly deserved. But think what he could have done when Chris Rock made that comment. He could have said to himself, I'm really angry about this, but what's the best responsibility? This is a key thing with emotional intelligence. Not responsibility, responsibility. How do I have an ability to respond in a way that is very helpful and in a way that enables me to have a win-win and a positive? And Viktor Frankl came up with this diagram. The diagram was there's a stimulus, there's a gap, and then there's a responsibility. So you get, somebody says something and you can feel your emotions going, then there's this gap in the middle where you choose how to respond. And then you have a responsibility. Will Smith could have said, boy, I don't like that comment about my wife, but this is the Academy Award. I think I'll let this go. Maybe I'll just let it go. Or the better part of it might have been, I'll talk to Chris Rock when this is all over. I'll meet, we'll just talk and I'll tell him I didn't appreciate it. And we'll take care of, I just want to let him know how I'm feeling about what he said. And if he only knew this. Instead, his response was immediate. He immediately gets out of his chair, walks up and hits Chris Rock. That's because he didn't take care of the gap. He didn't think through what he could have done. Now, I'm not trying to put guilt on him, or I'm just saying it's an example. And how many times have I done that myself, where I just, I may not have literally physically slapped somebody, but I have emotionally with my words done that, or I've done, and that's why emotional intelligence is so important. So that'll kind of give you a little bit about why I'm up here. I think it's a great tool, a great and important thing to learn in biblical peacemaking.
Thank you so much, Pastor Tom. Great practical wisdom to really help get us going. Also, another pastor who serves on New Wine's Advisory Council is Pastor Jim Sequeira. He is Native American who grew up on the Big Island of Oregon and Salem. I've been there once or twice, but he is married to Glenna, and they have 2 married adult kids and 2 grandchildren. Jim lives and pastors in Vancouver, Washington, the ancestral land and waterways of the Chinook peoples. He received his MDiv from Western Seminary and MA in Intercultural Studies from the North American Institute for Indigenous Theological Studies, ordained in the Evangelical Covenant Church, and pastors at Cascade View Covenant Church in Vancouver. Jim's been involved in addressing issues of justice, mercy, and racial righteousness at local, conference, and denominational levels. He was also involved with the work of the Evangelical Covenant Church's passing of the repudiation of the doctrine of discovery. Some powerful, important, vitally important work. He serves on the board of, and I'm not going to be able to say this correctly, Elohe? Elohe? Exactly.
Yeah.
Indigenous Center for Earth Justice. Jim has a love and passion for his Hawaiian culture, as well as the culture and stories of Native American and other indigenous peoples. Jim also enjoys playing music, wood carving, building models, and is a Star Wars and sci-fi geek. Jim is going to be sharing about indigenous cultural contributions to peacemaking. Pastor Jim Sequeira.
Dr. Potter, I feel like you're the judge for the Olympics, and so I hope my routine goes well. So he's got that card ready to go. Aloha kako. As Dr. Metzger says, I'm native Hawaiian, but also Chinese. My dad's from Lahaina. My mom's from Hilo, Hawaii. And so they came to go to school here. And I'm looking at the clock right now, and I was still in bed on Oahu yesterday. So I flew in last night, and so great to be here with everybody. So the contribution for indigenous people, I'm thinking Native Americans, and in this area, the ancestral grounds, this is the Kalapuya people. Native Americans were here for 10,000 years. 10,000 years. And as far as I've read, there's nothing about genocide. They have not destroyed people. They have not destroyed other tribes. There was conflict, but we never, indigenous people never eliminated people. And so Christopher Columbus did not discover America, which they call Turtle Island. The Hawaiian Islands, we started habitating because of the navigation and all that, 400 AD. We were there 400 AD, and almost over 1,300 years before Captain Cook discovered us. And so indigenous people have been around, and not only just indigenous people, but indigenous civilizations have been around a long time. And it has been through peacemaking that I think that has sustained us and kept us around and kept us alive. Peacekeeping, peacemaking is, in Hawaii, we call it ho'oponopono, but peacemaking is part of our DNA. It's part of it's who we are. It's how we live our life. My cousin and I were talking about gathering when we were growing up, when we'd go back in the summers, we'd have ho'oponopono. Our grandfather, we would get together. And my cousin says, you remember when Papa would do ho'oponopono? But we never called it that. We just did it. We just shared with one another and had this time of conversation. And so it was a very important part of life. I have some important news to tell you. We are all indigenous. We are all indigenous people. We are not, I mean, there might be, is there anybody Native American here that your ancestors? Okay, so we're all indigenous people. And my mother, I remember my mother telling me, growing up, she says, be proud you're Hawaiian. Be proud you're Hawaiian. I grew up in Salem. She said, make sure your hair is combed, your clothes are nice, but be proud you're Hawaiian. Because being Hawaiian was very, very important to her. And then as I grew up and faced issues of racism and things like that, I went back to my mom's words: "Be proud you're Hawaiian." So what does that mean? The spirit of aloha, building bridges, loving people, caring for people. And you know what? Life does have bad people and mean people, but you know what? They deserve aloha as well. And so I guess one of the questions, because I believe all indigenous people, your ancestors had a way of doing peacekeeping, because that's what allowed their tribes, your peoples to survive, whether you're Swedish, Norwegian, African, whatever your lineage is. Your tribe has been able to maintain, and that's why you're here, is because they have stayed together for so long. It's part of peacekeeping, right? And so if you were to sit back and your ancestors, what would your ancestors say to you? Fill in the blank, be proud your, and discover what your indigeneity is. And so I'm really here to remind us of our indigeneity, because I believe that what we understand peacemaking and peacekeeping to be is a colonized version. It's a colonized version of really what is meant to be. And what I mean by colonized version, it's, you know, peacekeeping isn't about just life without conflict. It's living what we call pono, good and balanced, you know, with one another. So some of the ways that I think one of the most important ways is storytelling, knowing other people's stories. New Wineskins, we had a fall conference, and I sat with the table with this brother, Tom, of mine, and Brad. Who else was with us at that table?
There was another.
Phil Berlin, the darker guy,
Right.
The guy that's darker than I am, or African-American friend. You know, and we sat at the table, and I came in, I mean, I've got to know them through New Wine and New Wineskins, but we sat and we had the most incredible discussion. We got to hear one another's stories. And when you start to understand somebody's stories, peacemaking becomes a whole lot easier, right? What I tell people is, if you get involved with things like racial righteousness, racial injustice, and you don't know the people, it's only a cause. It's only a cause, and causes come and go. I've seen people get involved with causes one day and they're gone the next day. But when you're in relationship with people, it becomes a lifestyle. And you're not just standing up for Black Lives Matter. You're standing up for people like David Greenwich, Phil Berlin, people like that. And so relationships are so important. And so I believe that one way for peacekeeping from an indigenous point of view is learning storytelling, listening to people's stories and listening without judging. Because we have a way of thinking, you know what, we can't be that bad. You know, it's not me, that's, you know, but I think we need to kind of just pause and listen to the people's stories instead of making them defend their stories. Let them share from their heart, share their mana'o, their kuleana, where they stand. You know, what I appreciate about New Wine and New Wineskins is that it is a place to be able to tell your story and not be challenged and questioned. From the very moment, I mean, I'm kind of like the outsider, because everybody, when everybody talks about New Wine and New Wineskins, their story begins with either Dr. Metzger or Dr. Brad. That's not where my story begins. I was like invited because a friend was completing a time on the board. They've listened to my story. They've listened to my story. And New Wine continues to expand storytelling. In Clubhouse. Clubhouse is awesome. You know, Tuesdays, if you want to go to Clubhouse, there's discussions, and it's raw discussions. You want to learn about people? Sit in and don't leave when they have raw discussions. And that has been an opportunity. Another thing has been New Wine's Uncorked on Friday. I mean, there's so many other things, but New Wine has done what I believe is taking big steps as far as when it comes to peacekeeping and peacemaking, is listening to people's stories, because that's where I think it belongs. Because when we start to know other people, we will stay at the table, no matter how ugly, how hard and difficult it gets, and come to a place of pono, of balance and peace.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Pastor Jim. And talking story, right? Which is such a beautiful aspect of Hawaiian culture. It's not sound bites. It's really sharing from the heart. There's a vulnerability. There's a tenacity and honesty. It's just, when we were in Hawaii and I learned about this theme of talking story, and I just thought, this is amazing. And just what you were saying, it's not about a cause only, it's about a community and a sharing a story. And Clubhouse Uncorked, different aspects of New Wine's ministry, you can find out about that if you're at our Facebook page and such for New Wine, New Wineskins, what Pastor Jim was talking about, and we can make that available to conference attendees. So again, many thanks, Pastor, on this theme of what indigenous contributions are present to peacemaking with Pono and the like. And New Wine is about building relational bridges through Jesus in contemporary culture. Through Jesus, shaped by Jesus, we seek to build relational bridges in contemporary culture. Now we're going to hear from Pastor Trudi Sang, longstanding leader at New Wine, doctoral student at Multnomah Biblical Seminary, has been here a while, working with us and serves as New Wineskins Advisory Council co-chair with Pastor CJ Young, and also our New Wine disability advocate. She's also director of care and serve at New Northwest Christian Church Tigard campus, president of Interfaith Disability Network of Oregon, Delta Kappa Gamma, that's really impressive, Beta Beta chapter committee lead. It's amazing. Wow, just that alone is worth the whole bio. Community and school supports, and member of the Early Learning Washington County Steering Committee as a faith representative. Trudi has received her master's in education with a focus on early children and minor in special education from the University of Oregon, and her Master of Divinity in chaplaincy from Multnomah University Biblical Seminary. She is currently in the process of obtaining a doctorate of ministry and cultural engagement from the seminary, and she serves in a variety of community networks that address education and the needs of the community. She is a volunteer for the Portland Rose Festival Clown. She was actually Clown of the Year, International Clown of the Year. Yeah. And again, your character's name is
Nellie.
Nellie the Clown. Amazing. You gotta check this out. And has been awarded, as I said, Clown of the Year 2018 by Clowns of America International. But she won't be sharing so much about that today. I mean, she has shared about that at New Wine. It's been phenomenal. It's been amazing and the like. Even we did a conference retreat on Beatitudes out at the coast. You were dealing with that. And but what she's going to focus on today is the cultivation of a quiet spirit for contending against overstimulation. She'll share a little bit about the work that you're doing at church in that regard for that particular room. But I think it has such broad cultural implications beyond just that room at church for the rooms of our lives and society at large. So that's why I've asked Trudi to share. Thank you so much, Pastor Sang.
Thank you and welcome. Yes, the clowning is the weird thing, but that's what keeps me balanced. When everything else is so serious, to embrace the joy and love of creativity and bringing hope and joy to the city of Portland, mostly with the Portland Rose Festival, has been a joy. But I'd like to just say, well, how did I get to all this? How do I even get to this point where I'm involved in these different things, as well as doing the doctoral work that I'm involved in, where I'm focusing on the disability population and specifically focusing in on sensory awareness. And so two key pieces of my life that God used to bring me to this point in my life was, one, the diagnosis of my son. My son Luke is now 34 and he is autistic-like. He's a Fragile X syndrome diagnosis, but through that journey, sensory issues was a constant battle where sensory overload happened frequently, and therapies and all sorts of things had to occur to get him to a point to even cope in our world. And so that was a huge transformation for our family and a challenge. And also, how does our church address this? How does it welcome people that are dealing with similar challenges? Then it kind of got pushed in a little deeper, and this reflects into our today world, is my husband and I in 2017 and 18 traveled to Ukraine to support special need families at Grace Church outside in Brovary, which is just a suburb of Kyiv. We spent quality time with incredible people that were dealing with lack of resources, but such a determination of a church that was embracing people with disabilities. And so we came away, offering, just how does one cope as being parents of someone with a special need, and embracing the value and knowing that they were not a mistake. They were they are the parts of the body of Christ, and that they have a critical piece to play in our world. So that was a catalyst. Needless to say, my emotion is really raw when it comes to Ukraine right now, as I keep track of my dear friends there. So all of that happened. And then coming into how do we really face that, and knowing that our world, as we know, with social media, with the way our world is constructed, there's constant bombardment of sensory overload and information that's coming at us from all angles. How can we quiet that? And so one of the things that I did at our church campus was I developed a sensory room where it's just a place where it's got sound panels. It's not glitzy, doesn't have lots of stimulus in it, has some real key things that you can use to create that cuddle or that calm, or a fidget that would be calming, or even just getting into a tent to bring down the sensory. And it's so beautiful to be able to walk into that room, even in a normal day, and go, I can breathe again, because we're so overloaded. And we had an individual walk into our church recently with an adult son who had pretty significant challenges with sensory overload. And I said, would you like to come into our sensory room? And he took his son in there, and he said, he was in there for about 25, 30 minutes. He came out and goes, that's the first time I've been able to breathe really for a while. The significance of creating that environment of calm. And then we also have sensory bags that are used within the sanctuary as well as in our classrooms, with fidgets that allow people to move in ways that are quiet, but yet are calming. We have to look at our environments to say, how are we setting people up for failure to even come into our environments? When we think that the glitz and glam of the latest production of however we put in our sanctuaries is so cool, how are we overwhelming our people? Whether they're dealing with an autism, or there's people with migraines, there's people with anxiety, there's people with the older generation with hearing aids that get overwhelmed by sounds, and there's people with seizure issues that get stimulated because of certain sights and visuals. We need to really think of how can we bring down the message of calm, and to let people breathe and be that welcoming, bridging environment that welcomes people instead of alienates them.
Thank you so much, Trudi, always poignant. So appreciate you and your wisdom in so many spheres. Now we're going to hear from Mr. Bob Wall, who's helped me over the years as a mentor in the area, especially of leadership development and how to grow in my own engagement of conflict, and to develop a bigger toolkit when it comes to conflict resolution. So I hope he is able to hear and to share. Is that the case now? Okay, and we'll cut that off depending on what he says. Okay, so Mr. Robert Wall has served over 35 years in local government, 20 years as fire chief, 13 in Palo Alto, California, and 7 more in Portland, Oregon. After retirement, he was called to serve as interim director of ministries at Cedar Mill Bible Church. And I quote from him, "What a difference, what a similarity," he discovered. Whether just directing firefighters or pastors, Bob saw a common thread. And I quote again, "How do we as a society tolerate unequal opportunity based on race and gender?" Mr. Wall was raised in a small lumber and farming town in Oregon. He was college educated in the early 1960s in California. This was during America's struggle with civil rights for all. Bob's career was as much about breaking the barriers to employment opportunities for minority Americans as it was about responding to smoke, fire, and medical trauma. Bob states that, and I quote, "Even in retirement, there are plenty of fires today. What divides us is like a firestorm. However, what can unite us is even more powerful, a refining fire, one worth feeding, not fighting. And we've appreciated so much over the years Bob's role as a senior leader at New Wine, New Wineskins on the advisory council with his wife, Cookie Wall, who served as our chair, and then Gloria Young, who also leads at New Wine on our board of directors when she was co-chair. And they worked together as our core leadership team on the AC. So Bob, please share your thoughts. And again, the theme he'll be dealing with is expansion of one's toolkit for addressing conflict. Mr. Wall.
Thank you, Paul. It's good to be here. Actually, for a little while today, we were without sound, but Cookie helped me with that technology, and we're up and running. So it's good to be here with you. I really appreciated both Jim and Trudi, what you had to say, and it's an honor to sit down with all of you and talk about this important subject. Paul, thank you for the introduction. I don't know about these long introductions. Usually I just go by, I'm a Jesus follower, I'm attracted to problems, and I'm inspired by solutions. That usually covers it for me. I am a trained peacemaker and a mediator, and over the years I've gathered quite a bag full of conflict resolution tools. The traditional kit of tools includes force and compromise and accommodation, withdrawal, collaboration. Let's talk about these tools just a little bit. Force is actually a style and a tool that is most often used, and it's one of the most damaging to relationships. It's a win-lose story, it really is. Compromise is very simply, let's split the pie. Accommodate is when differences are less important than our relationship. And we can say, here, let's do it your way. Withdrawal is when safety is an issue, life is at stake, or we just need a break to regroup or a timeout. Collaboration, I love this one. It's working together, and done right, it yields something better than either one of our established stated positions in the conflict arena. Well, God recently has been touching my heart significantly, and he's been messing with my conflict tool thinking. For the past 6 months or so, 5 New Wine, New Wineskin leaders moderate open discussions of relevant topics every Tuesday morning on New Wine, New Wineskins on Clubhouse. And this was mentioned previously by Jim. And you're all welcome to join us every Tuesday. The latest topic, Trinitarian bridge building from racism to peacemaking, very heavy. Through these dialogues, God has touched my heart in new ways and expanded my conflict tool thinking. I felt God saying to me, set aside your traditional conflict tools for the moment. And the reality is that trauma of racism in that topic, pained, excluded, unwelcomed, and sent "you don't belong here" messages to many of my friends of color. That broke my heart, and I know that it breaks God's heart as well. Well, what tool is there for that? And the truth is, without caring relationships, the traditional tools really are not enough. It seems to me that the elephant in the room is about the absence of caring relationships. The enemy has no interest in seeing caring relationships bear the fruit of peacemaking. Rather, the spirit of ego works overtime to keep people attacking each other. On the flip side, and I've often said this, relationships can grow and be transformed through relationships and through conflict. So it reminds me of Mark 9:29, where Jesus said to his disciples, after they could not cast out evil spirits, this one, he said, takes prayer. I think God's word to Jeremiah is also so fitting in chapter 6, verses 16 and 17. In the Message version says, God's message yet again, go stand at the crossroads and look around. Ask for the directions to the old road, the tried and true road. Then take it. Discover the right route for your souls. But they said, nothing doing. We aren't going that way. I even provided watchmen for them to warn them, to set off an alarm. But the people said, it's a false alarm. It doesn't concern us. Wow. Could it be that conflict associated with racism we discussed can best be addressed by bridge building relationships into caring friendships, friendships of mutual honor and respect, where real and honest stories are shared, like Jim talked about, where we can begin to work together for real change. There's a quote that God whispered to me. The best way to defeat an enemy is to make her or him your friend. I'm not sure who said it first, Abraham Lincoln, Mark Twain, or some emperor of long ago. I don't know, but I like the concept. My research found that this was a core value and a competency of Nelson Mandela, and one which he used to change the world for Ireland and Great Britain in the 1990s. The result was the Good Friday Belfast Agreement. I believe that Jesus is all about relationships, even commands us that we should love one another. I'm not sure that peacemaking can occur apart from building caring relationships with the other. My question for us during this conference is, what do you think?
Thank you so much, Bob, for those reflections. And I had heard that you were reflecting further and deeper on your conflict toolbox that you would be sharing about your own growth in this domain. And so thank you so much. And I would say for all of the panelists, no doubt, because we have limited time to interact, but stop them and discuss whatever stands out to you with them, whether now and later. We're developing this as part of our New Wine Advisory Council work in education, consultation, and transformation. And so peacemaking, conflict resolution is a core part of our ministry going forward, but interact with them via email. I'm sure they'd be open to that, or phone call. And I can make available to you all their cell phones after this time. Now, the person who's going to sum it all up for us is Pastor Ruben Alvarado, Professor Ruben Alvarado. He is the Assistant Professor of Pastoral Ministry and Community Development at Multnomah University. He also serves as pastor at Theophilus Church in Milwaukee, Oregon. Ruben has been involved in pastoral ministry for 17 years in both rural and in urban environments. From 2015 to 2021, he led his church's efforts in community development and city outreach, helping launch ministries in the areas of houselessness, anti-trafficking, foster care, incarceration, immigration, refugee support, and disability advocacy. That's a tall order. Ruben sits on the lead team for Serve PDX, a Portland-based collective of pastors collaborating to serve our city. He is an advisory council member for Jubilee Hall PDX, as well as for New Wineskins. And Ruben talks a lot about core competencies. And I thought it'd be great to hear Ruben share about what he's heard from his colleagues, what has really stood out, and how might this be formed in just a few minutes, just the initial reflection on how to develop from this group of leaders core competency. What would be the steps taken toward this theme of peacemaking? Pastor Ruben.
All right, thank you. And thank you everybody for sharing. I have a lot of notes here. I won't share all of them. Some are just for me, I think. As I think about core competency, Jim, one of the things you talked about, peacemaking being a way of life, and especially within your culture. For me, as a biracial person, growing up in a home where my father was Mexican, my mom is Caucasian. Also, they had difference in their faith traditions. My dad is Catholic, my mom was Pentecostal. So I was raised in both of those arenas and got multiple different perspectives on things. And sometimes peacemaking for me seemed like I was needing to protect my own peace. So it was avoidance, which in many ways was no real peacemaking at all. It was an avoidance to protect my needs. And as I grew, I realized I was in a privileged spot to know stories from different sides. And so I knew people's stories. I knew people, I had relationship. And so for me, I began to see that one of the things God could use me to do was to create bridges, and at least part of a bridge, right? To begin the process of doing peacemaking between people who are on different sides and maybe can't see it. And so for me, life was about building this core competency and learning from different stories, learning from the ways that peacemaking works, just everyday life. As I heard each of you share, and as I heard last night, I was reminded about this quote from Andrew Peterson, and he was talking about how God invites us to build his kingdom here on earth. And he says, he doesn't just, it's not just about hearing where is he at, but it's about adding our voice to what God's doing. And he invites us to do that. And it's fascinating that we just heard 4 different perspectives, and each one of you coming from a different place in life, different ages, different cultures, different jobs, right? And God gives us opportunities to add our voice and our skill set and to build that core competency of peacemaking where we're at. And so the quote that he said was, we have an infinite, each one of us has an infinite amount of opportunities to lay bricks for a kingdom. The question is, what kingdom? Are you going to build the kingdom, your kingdom? Are you going to build God's kingdom? Are you going to build the world's kingdom? And you know what? The world and culture will teach us a lot about the idea of peacemaking, or the opposite of peacemaking. And so we end up in our culture, I think, learning a core competency of division. And that's really unfortunate. But we're taught how to turn our neighbors into enemies, not how to love our enemies and our neighbors. And so we have to take seriously the fact that this beatitude says that this is not only how it's to be, that peacemakers are necessary in the kingdom, but that we would all build the core competency. And so as I think about that analogy of brick building, I think it plays really well with peacemaking. I can either lay bricks that build bridges between myself and others, or lay bricks that build bridges between others and some other people, or I can build walls, right? I can build things that divide us. And so I would think, as I was writing down, I have these little bricks, and I wrote some of the things down that each of you talked about. Because sometimes we might be in a spot and go, well, what does that mean? And how do I know which brick is the right one to lay? And so I just want to tell you remind you of some of the things we learned from my colleagues up here. So from Trudi, we learned that maybe the brick has a label on it that says embrace each other, no matter what difference. Maybe it's a brick that says create calm environments. Those are bricks that Trudi has learned to lay to create bridges and pathways between her and others and between others and others. And maybe God's calling you in your particular space, in your environment, to consider those things. From Pastor Jim, is it Pono? Good and balanced togetherness. When I'm too busy laying the brick of I'm right and you're wrong, I don't really have the brick Pono in my hand. I need to go find that brick and I need to figure out how to lay it in that conflict and in that resolution process. Talking story, can we lay that brick? Can we lay the brick of hearing each other's story, learning from each other's story, being willing to be vulnerable enough to tell my story and trust that you can hold it with me? From Pastor Tom, we learned laying the brick of seeking to understand. And we learned to lay the brick of taking advantage of that gap, pausing for a minute. Each one of us is going to have the opportunity today to put that into practice when conflict happens, right? To pause for a moment and decide, what is my response going to be? From Bob, we learned to keep learning new skills. I mean, that was the first thing I wrote down when you started talking was you were trained in this, you're an expert in this, and you said, I still have a lot to learn about this. And so might we lay the brick that says, I need to keep learning about peacemaking? Can we lay the brick that says, I'm interested enough in creating these kinds of relationships that I'm willing to set down everything that qualifies me to just be in relationship with you and to just love you? And the other brick I saw was relationships have conflict. That's an important brick to lay. We don't have to pretend like relationships don't have conflict. That's an avoidance. They do have conflict, but to be willing to pursue relationship through it, that's an important brick to lay, and it's one of the hardest. And so as I think about summing up all of these different things, I think the call is, what contribution do you have to make to peacemaking in where you live, in the places you work, in your homes, in the relationships you have? Because God invites each one of us to lay down bricks in his kingdom and add our voice to the process wherever we're at. And so for me, hearing these four diverse perspectives, it ignites my own imagination to remember where I'm at and what relationships I have and how I'm going to keep building that core competency.
Thank you so much, Ruben. I just appreciated the metaphor of bricks not to throw, but to lay a foundation with. And I was thinking of James, the book of James, it's not enough to understand, but really to do. And I loved how you not only listened well, as Pastor Tom had said about it's not being interesting, but being interested in others. You were listening well, and then how to apply that in very unique, concrete, or bricklaying ways. So I just wanted to say thank you. Loved what the panelists shared. Now we have a few minutes. At 10:15, we break for the first set of workshops, which will take place at 10:30. We'll share a little bit about that right then, but we have about 12 minutes. And just because we want to keep the screen, the video up here, just makes it easier for us in these rooms with the technology. If anyone would like to come up and ask a question, feel free to do so here. You can do that, or a concrete, explicit question to our panelists. If you don't, I will ask them questions, but we want to hear from you as well. But questions to our panelists. Anyone would like to come up and ask one at this juncture of them? Thomas, if you don't mind coming up and asking, that would be great. Thank you, sir. And others want to come on up? It saves time just to ask the question. Thank you.
Dr. Metzger knows I like to ask
You're
questions.
good at it. You're good at it.
This is for Pastor Jim. Do you think people get so caught up in the movement instead of actually listening to the story?
Yes.
Can you explain?
You know, I mean, I think we, as followers of Jesus, we really do want to do the right things. But I think what the challenge becomes in the Western culture, the Western colonized culture, is that we want to see something happen here and now. And I think it's the relational piece. It takes time. And so I think that, you know, if you want to, you know, if you're interested in racial reconciliation or anything like that, you need to start it now. It's the conversation begins now. But I think what happens is that we just want it so quickly. I mean, this is a society that things move so quickly. We FaceTime but we just need to slow down. I mean, we just really need to find that rhythm. In relationships, we talk about Hawaiian time. People say, oh yeah, you're on Hawaiian time. It kind of correlates with being late. There's also Swedish time. But really what Hawaiian time is relationships are valuable. Sometimes you sit a little bit longer with people. Really quick story. So my buddy and I, we're in Hawaii. We had to go get some banana stumps. Our wife said, you need to be back in half an hour. We got in the car. We were going to get banana stumps from an uncle who was an anthropologist in, I can't remember the island at this time. And so we got in the car and we knew we were in trouble. And so we go to get the banana stumps. Uncle comes in and goes, hey, you know, he gives us some lemonade. Hey, sit down. And so we're talking story. And so kapunas, elders, are very important in cultures. So we wanted to listen to this uncle's culture. 45 minutes, our phone started ringing. We're hitting silence. Hour later, our phone started ringing. We're hitting silence. And then finally, uncle goes, oh, banana stumps. You're here for banana stumps. And so we got the banana stumps. But we listened to his story for that hour, because to just go in and say, hey, I want my banana stumps, we got to get going. It would have been, for one, disrespectful, but it's part of the culture of listening to people's stories. So we were in big trouble by our wives. And so we needed to work on our peacekeeping at that time. And I'm still working through my peacekeeping, but it's taking time. The people's stories are significant. And sometimes, you know what, you need to just think, okay, do I have the time to do this? So great story, but it's just to slow down the rhythm, especially taking time to listen to your elders in kapunas. They're the ones that have some incredible stories, and they talk a little slower, but you know, that's okay.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Jim. Any other questions? We have about 7-8 minutes. Okay, I'm going to ask one because I'm not going to just sit here, even though I should be quiet and just listen. But, you know, this can't be done alone. And I mean, one reason why we asked several of you to share, it's because none of us have the God's eye point of view. And it's also the case we cannot do it alone. You know, Dr. King talked at great length about the beloved community and it wasn't him alone. He was part of a movement and he was inspired by others as well. You think of Rosa Parks and a host of others, names we don't even know, with the civil rights movement. But we can't do it alone. And I wonder what you would encourage, because the fact that a lot of people have come today, whether online, others have purchased, so to speak, the tickets to watch later, they're not available this week. Those who would come just because they want to, and those here today, you must have an interest in peacemaking. You must have an interest in it, but it's a long journey. We heard that. Bob's been at this for a while, and he's just this year, through interaction with others, learning more. What would you say in terms of the process of doing it in community, that you cannot do it alone? Any thoughts about that and where we go from here? I mean, Ruben talked about laying those bricks, but just those steps coming out of a conference like this, it can be information overload, but it's really those long-standing connections to others that keep us in the fight for peace rather than the fight from peace. Any thoughts? And I don't know if Bob, were you going to share something in response, or I couldn't tell if you were about to say something, but others here as well, from Tom, Trudi, Jim, Ruben.
Sure. Very quickly, you can't do it alone. And yet conflict is everywhere. And it weighs us all down, and it has ripple effects that go really wide in every case. So it affects everybody. So I think that stopping to listen is the first place. I'm pretty good at listening to others, except when I'm not. And, that gets me into trouble. So I think we need to sharpen the tool of listening to one another. Take time and ask questions. I did touch on the kind of the missing link here often is not getting to know one another in conflict. And I think that goes a long ways towards just doing what we can where we are every day. Learn to know one another.
Thank you, Bob. One or two others?
Yeah, I think for me, I learned a lot about listening by getting married. That for me was really important. My wife, Kathy's a great listener, and she would say to me sometimes, you're being defensive, or, you're not listening to me, which was a clue that I was being defensive and not listening to her. And I think listening to her and learning from her has been a very good thing. Working with my staff, we do a lot of relational connectedness and building together. Every quarter we just go out and do some kind of mystery trip somewhere and just enjoy each other, whether it's over lunch or whatever. And it's just interacting with them outside of the office and outside of ministry and getting to know them. That has been really important. And then working with elders and being open to be accountable to a group of elders in a church that say, hey, we think you missed off on this, or you missed this direction, and doing it in a way that, it's what you and I talk about, Paul. They know how to make a point without making an enemy. And I think that's a very important thing. So I think within a local church context, it's listening to your people, and it's getting to know your people outside of ministry, or just being able to sit down with one or two of them and listening to their story and understanding what their background is. It can't be done alone. These emotional intelligence skills can only be worked on in community, actually. So you might be equipped, but they make no sense unless you're working with others.
I'll just add something really quick. And in dealing with the disability population, and I think that all of you doing COVID isolation has had a taste of what typically is the experience of a lot of people dealing with disabilities, because isolation is one of the things that is the big barrier. And honestly, the biggest thing I would say is be inviting, embracing, create hospitality, because sometimes the challenges and sometimes the issues that can come around that world that people will shy away from. And as we invite people, that's incredible. And the people that I network with that are in the disability population, serving those, we find such power where we can pray for each other and just walk that journey. And it's been critical for our survival.
I was in Hawaii to attend a funeral of my uncle Ostander. So write Ostander and then Google him if you want to see some kupuna wisdom, elder wisdom. But my uncle said, surround yourself with people that are smarter than you. That was when it comes to peacekeeping. And we're not talking about people that are smarter on an intelligence level, people that are smarter than you in your experiences. Being with Trudi, I love being with Trudi because she has opened my eyes as far as handicap and disabilities, because, there is an anxiety, and peace is, having peace, pono, is being able to see a disabled person and not feel that anxiety, not have to be the person that crosses over the other street, right? But because Trudi has been smarter in that area, I have learned. And so when surround yourself yourself with people, I love this brother because of the movies, but I love that word you use, responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
I just wrote that down because peacemaking it's a process. I have some ideas, I've learned some things, but it's a journey. But I guess I would say surround yourself with people that are smarter than you, because when you walk in the room and you think you are the smartest person in the room, you have nothing to learn. And when I talk about smartness, it's not necessarily about intelligence. Intelligence is good, because that's why I hang out with Paul and Brad, because I do need to be around that kind of smart people especially. but smart in people, how they experience life.
Yeah, I think the thing I would add is that somebody will also need you. And so be willing to be that person as well, and not shy away from the fact that you've done peacemaking in your own life too, and you have experience doing it. You have relationships, so you have experience. And yeah.
Excellent points. And thank you so much for your time and your investment and sharing, and for your attentiveness in this morning's session, our first session. So at this point, we're going to transition to the workshops.